talking about her injuries, every single person in that room, including the videographer, the court reporter, myself, of course, even the defense attorney for the state, were in tears. And we had to take a break, not for her, but because all of us were a mess.
Matt, you recently just finished up a big case, a case you'd been working on for, years.
The biggest case of my career.
Yeah.
Sure.
It had a lot of moving pieces. Where did you start with this? Kind of give us a primer of how it started.
Well, the case started with another attorney giving me a call, and then a friend of mine also giving me a call. And so the referral came from two different sources of a sweet family who was involved in a tragic accident on a road that leads between Maricopa and Gila Bend. It's just a 2-lane road. Some people refer to it as the Dead Tail Road.
Mm-hmm.
And this family was coming back from a vacation. There was two parents, so mom and dad, who were really about my age. And they had a daughter. Their youngest daughter is about my youngest daughter's age. And so it was very personal to me. And these people, the more I didn't know them before the accident, but the more I got to know them through their family and friends, the more I realized these are people that I would have liked to have really hung out with. Well, they're coming back from San Diego, and as they're going down the road coming back into town, there was a commercial vehicle going to make a delivery that was heading west toward Gila Bend. And as they were heading west, the vehicle started to drift to the right because there was a semi-tractor trailer coming in the opposite direction. So just gradually going to the right. And all the way up until this point, there had been rumble strips on the road to warn a person if they were veering to the right too far. And all the way on the road up until this point, there was 2 feet of asphalt on the right side of the fog line. Well, so his vehicle veered off to the right just barely, but not enough to where the tires would have gone off the road if there was still 2 feet of asphalt. But instead, there was a drop-off. And these pavement edge drop-offs are things that are notorious that the state is supposed to look out for and take care of. And so that's how we got to the case. And there's so much to talk about with this case, but it was the single largest verdict, and I've been told, I don't know if this is accurate or not, the single largest verdict against the state of Arizona, not verdict, settlement against the state of Arizona in a personal injury case ever.
Well, I'm glad you made that mistake of saying verdict or settlement. One of the reasons this case did get settled, from my observations, watching you trudge through this very complex case, was how you were able to demonstrate to the state, you've got some real risk here. But in order to get to that point, it involved, like I said, a lot of work. Before we get to the state, you mentioned that there was a commercial driver heading west, and that asphalt drop-off was there. What did this commercial driver do, and what were you able to convince his insurance company to do?
So first of all, the insurance company for this commercial carrier there was 4 different insurance carriers. They have 4 different policies. And we were able to work with an attorney that was hired by that commercial carrier. And I can't say the name of the commercial carrier, just for purposes, we have a confidentiality agreement. And so in working with that attorney, they knew what we were going to do and how we were going to take the case and how we were going to pursue the case if it went into litigation. But by working with them and showing them what we were going to do, we hired an accident reconstruction expert. We hired a road design expert. We hired a lot of different experts. And we were going to show them, and we did show them, how the case would be set up if it went to court. But we never once, and this is key, we never once put in writing that their driver was at fault.
Why not?
The purpose for that is that we knew eventually down the road, once we settled with the commercial carrier, we were going to bring this case against the state of Arizona. We saw right up front that there was a case that was stronger against the state of Arizona even than there was against the commercial driver. The driver shouldn't have let the vehicle drift off to the right, but he didn't go all the way off the road. And had the road been in the proper condition, this accident never would have happened. And we'll get into that in a minute. But by setting it up that way, we were able to get a very large settlement for this sweet family, millions of dollars, and not at liberty to say how much, but it was an extremely high amount. The amount that I've seen some firms put up on billboards that we don't do.
I drive by some of those signs and I think, Matt's case is bigger than that.
Yeah.
You said a few things in there that made me think about things you do before you even do things in the case. Particularly in this case, you mentioned the order of operations seemed really important. You weren't going to go after the state until you did this thing, but to do this thing, you had to hire these people and spend this much money. How did you come up with the order of doing that, and why?
Well, great question. One thing to know, and this is something for the people watching to know, is whenever you have a claim against the government, you have to record and file and serve upon the defendants, the government, something called a notice of claim. In that notice of claim, you have to tell them the specific facts and your argument as to why they're at fault. You have to tell them, this is really important, a sum certain, and you know this.
Yeah.
A sum certain. And if you don't put a sum certain in there, if you say we would like you to pay a reasonable amount to our clients, and because you don't know the value of the case, you have to put in an amount that's really high. And so we had to do that with the state within 180 days, not 6 months, but 180 days. A lot of unwary attorneys have missed that and have lost their cases for their clients. And so 180 days, we did submit a notice of claim to the state of Arizona while we were still pursuing the case with the commercial carrier. And then so the proper order of things, we were getting this taken care of on the left hand while we're working with the right hand over here. Then we had to file a lawsuit within a year. So we were against any government entity, you have to file a lawsuit within a year of the date of the incident. So we were trying to really get this other civil case against the commercial carrier wrapped up within that year time frame, because we knew the state would then subpoena the records from the insurance companies that we were dealing with and from the law firm that we were working with. And if they saw anything in writing where we put liability or fault upon their driver, they would capitalize that and point out to the jury, well, look, Mr. Riggs, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You're saying that the driver's at fault here when you're working with the commercial carrier, but now you're saying the state is at fault over here. We made sure that didn't happen. So they could have no ammunition to take to the jury. And so we were able to get this behemoth settlement with these 4 insurance companies for millions of dollars, and without putting anything in writing, pointing the finger at their driver. And in fact, if I can just tell you, once we were able to get that resolved, both myself and my clients, we all felt bad for this driver. We had seen the driver because he had a dash cam that pointed both inside and outside the vehicle. And so we saw him, and he really didn't do anything that I would consider to be negligent, other than allow the vehicle to drift just a little bit to the right. And but for that asphalt drop-off, this accident never would have happened. If it was a smooth surface, his car would have just gone like this and come right back on. But instead, the tires acted like a fulcrum. And when he tried to bring the front tire back onto the asphalt, the back tire acted like a fulcrum, and it just spun his vehicle like this, and he went right into head-on traffic and ran into her client's vehicle, and it killed the parents, and it seriously injured their daughter that was in the back seat.
You mentioned this drop-off a few times, and you used an interesting word there, a fulcrum, almost catapulting, you said.
It did.
I'm assuming you went out there and looked at this drop-off and measured things. Did we have an expert go look at it? How does that process work?
Yeah. So first I went out to look at it myself. Took one of our associate attorneys out there with me, and we took some cones, we took cameras, we took a video camera, and we went out and shot the scene ourselves and looked over the scene. And it's really in the middle of the desert. And so we were able to see, this is really bad. This is a bad drop-off. And if we wouldn't have gone to the scene, we wouldn't have known that the state had any liability. We would have just seen the accident from the perspective of inside the dash cam and outside the dash cam. But by going to the scene, we saw this drop-off and came back and did some research about asphalt drop-off cases, reached out to an expert, one that lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, great guy, Alan Parham, and he is just a fantastic man. And then he flew into town, but before he got here, I went out with a videographer, someone who we knew does a lot of good video work and camera work, and I saw a tire sitting there on the side of the road, and the thought came to me, and Wes, you know me, I act on those thoughts.
Sure.
So I went outside, and the tire was just filthy, and it had a lot of water on the inside of it. So I tried to shake out the water. Have you ever tried to shake water out of a tire? It just doesn't come out. And so I tried getting it out. So finally I said, all right, what the heck? I'm just sticking it in my car. And so I go and I put this big tire in the back of my car, back seat of my car. And our videographer said, what in the world are you doing? And I said, we're going to use this as an exhibit, as a demonstrative exhibit. So I want to take a picture of this tire in the divot where that drop-off is located. That picture.
Yeah, you showed me the picture. You can't look at that picture and not go, ooh, that's bad. Because the variance in height between that drop-off and the street is clearly too high and not supposed to be there. It's so obvious. But I remember when I saw that picture, one of my first thoughts was, well, Matt, I understand that's bad. That shouldn't be there. But you have to prove that the state knew about it, that they had some obligation to fix it. And if you can't prove that they knew that was a problem, as bad as that is, how are you going to get liability against the state? And you tackled that in an interesting way. Tell me about that.
Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but one of the things that we did was we took the depositions. A deposition is where you ask a lot of questions of witnesses outside of court, but under oath, as if they are sitting on the witness stand. And so we took the deposition of several ADOT employees. We took the depositions of the DPS officers that came out to investigate. And then we also took the deposition of a couple of witnesses that came upon the accident afterward that actually pointed out what they thought was wrong with the road and what caused the accident. And then it showed that the DPS officers didn't even pay attention to them. They didn't put it in the report, even though they pointed out to the state employees, the DPS employees, that this drop-off was there. And so we tackled it in all of those ways. And then with all of these photographs, with the dash cam videos. And then we also had an accident reconstruction expert. We had a human factors expert, and I'll tell you about that one in a second. And we had a road design expert. Those were the experts on the liability side. We had a lot of experts on the damages side as well. But we needed to get the driver to understand that we were essentially on his side now and agreeing that he didn't do anything wrong. And so I went to go find him. I called the attorney that represented him and said, may I go and speak with your client? And he gave me permission. So I went to that address that I had, and I went in jeans that had holes in the knees, and I drove a pickup truck, and I got over there, and I just didn't want to look like an attorney when I walked up to the door. Had a baseball hat on, and I knocked on the front door. There was no answer. So I walked over to the carport, and there was a door leading to the house on the carport, and I could hear people inside. So I knocked on that door. Nobody came to the door. I knocked again. Nobody came to the door. Then a little girl came walking around the corner, and she looked up and saw me, and I waved to her, and she waved back, and we smiled at each other. And then the mom came over, and she came out and was a little gruff. What do you want? And I said that I would like to talk with so-and-so, the name of the driver. And she said, well, he doesn't live here. So I had this address. Let me tell you who I am and why I'm here. And I explained to her that I'm here to help prove that her son is not at fault for the accident, that it was because of the state not taking care of the road properly. And she was still a little gruff. She told me that her son doesn't live there any longer. I said, well, will you give him my name and phone number and have him give me a call? And I thought, there may be a 1 in 10 chance that she's going to follow up on this. But sure enough, that night, this was a Saturday. So Saturday night, I get a call on my cell phone, and it's actually him. And we had his deposition set for the next week, that during the upcoming week on a Thursday, I believe it was. And I needed to talk with him ahead of time and make sure he was going to be there. And so I talked with him over the phone. He came and met with me on Tuesday, and I explained to him, and I showed him the video of the dash cam to show him that he didn't do anything wrong, that this was all on the road not being maintained properly. Well, he was emotional about that. I didn't show him all the way up through the crash. I wouldn't do that. Yeah. And it was just too traumatic. And he's a nice guy. The family this is a beautiful family. They have no animosity, no hard feelings toward him at all. They don't have hard feelings toward the state, but they wanted to take care of it, especially the daughter that was in the back seat.
Yeah.
So anyhow, he came to the deposition. We were able to ask him questions. He didn't have a memory. He was injured in the accident as well, very badly, and didn't have a memory of the accident, or for a lot of the time leading up to the accident. And so he wasn't a ton of help. But I think it helped him to get closure, which, hey, that was huge for me, to help him get closure. And I think it was big for the family
I was
too.
going to say big for the clients as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were able to get that taken care of, and his statement, his deposition helped us to prove liability as well.
You mentioned experts for proving liability and experts on damages. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. In these sort of cases, like you said, the parents passed away in the accident, and then you had their daughter in the backseat who was severely injured and will have injuries and be dealing with the consequences of those injuries the rest of her life. Explain a little, how does it work in Arizona for a wrongful death beneficiary? Who gets to make a claim? Who made a claim in this instance? And how did you go about proving the damages for those wrongful death claims? And I really am interested in hearing about how you proved the damages for the injured daughter.
All right. A lot of questions there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So no, I think you can tackle that one. In Arizona, there's 3 categories of beneficiaries to a wrongful death case. The children of the deceased, the spouse of a deceased, and the parents of a deceased. Siblings don't have a claim. Unfortunately, I wish the law was different,
No.
but it's not. And so in this case, we didn't have a spouse, but we had 4 children, and we had both sets of parents of the deceased. And so we made a claim for all 8 of those individuals for the wrongful death of the 2 that passed away. And we made that claim against the state. First, we made the claim against the commercial carrier and their insurance companies, and then we made that claim against the state. The way we developed those damages, what's interesting is we did a lot of jury verdict research
Oh, that.
to see, because each category of individual is very unique.
Yeah.
We had parents who were elderly. And interestingly, because the parents that passed away were about my age, and I'm not a spry chicken, they weren't reliant upon the income for the counsel or anything like that of these people that had passed away. And so the value of their claim, according to juries, is less than that of children. All of the children were adult children, and all of them were at least out of the house to the point where they were in college or living on their own, emancipated. And so the value of that claim could be a lot less than what we were able to obtain. But by preparing our clients for the deposition and helping the state's attorney and the people in the risk management for the state to see what an amazing family this was, and what close relations they had, how deeply these relations ran, and how often they were together and communicating with each other, I think the state saw a jury would award a lot of money to these people. And so we were able to get a good amount, a strong amount for each individual, not just for the group collectively, but for each individual for the wrongful death case, including for the daughter that was injured. She obtained a wrongful death amount. And we were able to boost up her claim because if you think about it, she was going through these massive injuries, life-altering injuries without parents at a tender age. And so the value of the wrongful death claim for her was higher than it was for her siblings. And so we were able to establish that.
I hadn't considered with the daughter who was injured. You feel for all of those kids, despite the fact that they're older. Like you said, from what I saw, all had a loving relationship with their parents. But for the daughter to go through those terrible injuries without her mom and dad, especially knowing how close she was to her mom and dad, yeah, there's definitely added value there for sure.
Something else that we pointed out that this family just can't help themselves. After the parent's death, the daughter that was injured moved in with one of her sisters and her husband and their children. And the sister, who also lived close by, the other sister would go and pick up the injured sister, drive her from close to Queen Creek out to Phoenix every day, 5 days a week, would sit there in the waiting room doing her work on a laptop all day long while she got physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, recreational therapy, all kinds of therapy.
Wow.
Out at Barrow Neurological Institute, and then she would drive her home. This family just this is just who they are, and so we were able to help the defense see that, and I think that by helping the defense see that, they were able to obtain a higher award, a higher settlement, just because of the nature of who they were.
Yeah.
And that we were able to point that out to the state.
You mentioned some of the therapies that daughter needed, and I know she will need the remainder of her life in some regard. How do you demonstrate in this case to the state, because we don't have a crystal ball, how do you make sure they understand what the needs are going to be indefinitely for her and that they take account for that in their settlement?
That's where we work with other experts. So we had a nurse practitioner who is certified as what's called a life care planner. And what this nurse does is she works with a doctor. So we have a doctor that's an expert, that's a family, usually a physiatrist, and not a lot of people have heard of physiatrists. They're physical rehabilitation, and it's a physical medicine and rehabilitation expert, PM&R doctors. And so we hired a PM&R doctor to go and meet with this daughter, interview her, perform an examination. Then the nurse that's the life care planner got with him and also did her own evaluation of the daughter, got with the doctor. They collaborated and figured out what she was going to need. They reviewed all of her records, which were voluminous.
Oh, yeah.
And they put together a life care plan. They had to talk to the doctors at Vero. They had to talk to other doctors and get costs of what it's going to take for this daughter's care into the future for the rest of her life. We hired an economist who also did a life care, added to the life care plan by showing how much her loss of income would be. And so this daughter was a student in college, studying to be a speech pathologist, and she's no longer going to be able to do that. And so what could she have made if she was a student, what could she have made if she continued going on? But this, as opposed to what she'll be able to do now, and to show that disparity added value to the claim, and we were able to get that for her. There was a lot to do with setting up that life care plan for our client.
Yeah, I'm going back in my mind, thinking about some of the experts you've listed just in this case: accident reconstruction, human factors, roadside design, life care planner, economist. I'm sure I'm missing a few as well. Why so many experts, and are they really necessary? I could see someone not familiar with our field saying to themselves, well, obviously she's injured. There it is. We can see the pictures or we can see the x-rays. We don't need an expert to tell us that. So why go down that road?
Not every case requires experts.
Sure.
And we have to be really careful because any money that we spend on an expert is money that is taken away from our client's case. We forward all of the costs. So in this case, we forwarded close to $400,000
I know.
in expert witness fees and other costs to do with the case. It's a risk that we take. It was a calculated risk, and we were confident that we were going to win this case. And so we spent the money. If we don't win the case, as you know,
Those costs.
we eat those costs. And so we have to really be confident about the case. But in this particular case, we had to have a road design expert. There's no question.
Yeah.
We had to have an accident reconstruction expert. No question. We had to have an expert videographer and photographer. Such a difference that made. We had to have a human factors expert to point out to the defense that this driver who was going down the road acted reasonably under the circumstances, because the defense had just the opposite. They had experts saying that he didn't act reasonably. So they had 3 experts for liability against our experts. They had experts for damages against our experts. So we needed those experts to prove this case and to establish the cost of care and the future economic loss to this daughter. There's no way that we could calculate it, and we've watched our experts do this enough to where we could probably do it.
Yeah.
But we don't have the letters behind our name to give us their credentials to back it up.
And without those credentials, the other side, objection, Your Honor, and that evidence gets kicked out sometimes. And so, especially if the other side has, like you mentioned, they've got their own experts. If we just stood up and said, well, we think you're wrong and here's why, it wouldn't fly. We would have to have equally credentialed experts to combat theirs.
Interestingly, in this case, our 3 liability experts, the defense, the state, they filed motions to exclude our experts. And so we had to fight those motions, and we won on all of those motions. And we're able to prove that our experts passed muster and that their opinions should be allowed to be presented to the jury.
After you get all of this information, especially in your case against the state, because you were able to resolve the case against the commercial driver, all things considered, relatively quickly, does the packaging of all this really matter? And what I'm getting at is, I know you went to a mediation that lasted several weeks, if I recall. How you present the information to the other side in every case I've had, especially the bigger cases, matters a lot. And I'll just say, because you won't brag about yourself,
You'd be surprised.
you put together a mediation memorandum that had all the information we've alluded to here. But one thing I thought you did that was brilliant, and it was hard to watch, frankly, is you put clips of the daughter's deposition in the mediation. And to listen to her and to watch her talk about how her life is different because of the accident and the injuries she deals with and what she thinks about her future. That was the hardest part. You have to press pause and step away like I had to. It's impactful. And you are reminded that this is much more than a car crash and some injuries. It's someone's life. And in this instance, it's the life of someone who has so much future in front of her and was given and developed so much beautiful talent and was a hard worker and still has that attitude of she's going to move forward and progress and do her best. but mortality and injuries are real, and it's going to have an impact on her. And as I read through that very long, detailed mediation memorandum, I felt like, okay, now I know the bones of this case, but watching the video, now I understand the emotion of this case. And while I didn't have the state call me and say, this is why we're paying this much, my thought, and I know the thought of a few others here, was, that's it. That's it. We were able to find the most impactful aspect of the case and show the state what it was. And to them, that equates to risk. And they know there's no way they didn't think about how a jury would be impacted by that. And anyway, packaging and presentation, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And it's very important how you present those things. And I guess I don't have a question at the end of that, but you did a good job on that.
Well, thanks. This was one of those cases where you're right, the presentation really did mean a lot. Presenting the liability was, the liability case was so important, and it was so important for them to understand that we were going to be able to convince a jury that the state was at fault. Once you cross that hurdle, then you have to make the clients endeared to the defense. The defense has to know that the jury is going to love our clients. Our clients were so lovable.
Yeah.
To a person. Every single one of our clients, the parents, every single parent was lovable. The children, they were all lovable. And the daughter that was injured, so
This is why I was going to talk about it. Because I knew this would happen.
sitting through her deposition, she was living out of state. And I flew and went, I met with her and prepared her for the deposition. And I met with all the family. They were all out of state at this point. And sitting through her deposition, you couldn't be human and not be moved and brought to tears from her deposition. She was calm, and she was just as sweet and beautiful as she is. And talking about her injuries, I because she might watch this someday, I don't want to be too personal. But every single person in that room, including the videographer, the court reporter, myself, of course, even the defense attorney for the state, were in tears. And we had to take a break. Not for her, but because all of us were a mess. And so taking that and helping someone who wasn't there to understand that and to see it and to feel it and to present it in such a short package that we give to the mediator and that we give to the risk management department for the state, so that they get a good enough flavor to understand, you don't want to put this family on the jury stand.
No.
You don't want a jury to possibly have a chance to award money to this family, because it could just devastate the state.
No.
And it did. And the state gave their largest settlement award, which, at least that's what I'm told. I can't say that because I don't know, but that's what I'm told by multiple sources. It's not that I did such great work. It's that everything fell into place. We knew how to do the work. We did do the great work, but it also had to be a great case. The facts had to be great. And so you can be a great attorney and never have a case like this in your life. Sure. But to have the talent and the skills, and you know as well as I do, it wasn't just me in this firm. You and I talked about this case for hours, many times. Robert Greer in our firm, who has 98 jury trials under his belt, sometimes representing, most of the time in his career, he has represented insurance companies. But then he's come over to the bright side.
Yeah, he's seen the light.
Yeah.
How many state records did he dig through from ADOT, if I remember?
Robert's Robert's work on this case was legendary. We talked with John Jameson. We talked with Cameron Farnsworth. All of the attorneys in the firm.
Yeah.
And we would roundtable this. I think every time we had a roundtable, which we do once a month, this case was brought up until it was done. We would talk about this case a lot and get the collective wisdom of all of the attorneys in the firm. And so I think that was something that really helped the case as well. It wasn't just me. It was the collective wisdom of our firm.
Well, I know we all learned a lot from it, and it was one of the more, if not the most satisfying cases we've had a chance to work on for sure. And it's the kind of case where the clients, by the end of it, are not clients, they're family.
Yeah.
They're calling for other reasons, asking questions, and will always be calling if they have a need. Hopefully they don't call us. Hopefully they don't need us. But if they do, we're here, and grateful for the lessons we learned on that case.
Yeah, that makes two of us.